That's right, bitch. Today, we're gonna be learning how to do some damn math. As some of you who may know me personally, perhaps, might know, I'm actually a math major at university. I study math and physics. May come as a bit of a surprise, because, I talk a lot about Japanese language learning and stuff, but, that's not really, I don't know how I'd make money from that. So, here I am. I like math too. I like numbers. Numbers are cool. Numbers are very cool. But I thought, hey, maybe I should combine the Japanese and the math into something. I couldn't find a ton of great resources in English, especially not YouTube videos, on how to read math equations in Japanese. So I thought, hey, why don't I fill in this niche? Why don't I become the change that I want to see in the world? So, yeah, that's what we're doing today. Side note, while I am in a VR chat world that does have pens and a blackboard, I'm not going to be using those, because those are a lot of hassle. Trust me, I recorded 10 minutes of this while trying, and it just doesn't work as well as you would hope. So, sorry, you're just gonna have to deal with text. So let's start with the 4 basic operators, aka addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They each have their own Japanese names and their own ways of reading the symbols, but they're pretty simple to learn. So let's start with plus, or addition. The Japanese word for addition is tashi zan, and the symbol is read as tas. Subtraction is hiki zan, and the symbol is read as hiku. Multiplication is kake zan, and the symbol is kakeru. And finally, division is wari zan, and the symbol is read as wara. So these are all basic Japanese words. Tas means to add, so it can also be used, for example, adding ingredients to a dish or something. Hiku means to pull. In this case, its meaning has been sort of transferred over into kind of pulling one number from another, aka subtracting. Kakeru has 20 different English definitions, so don't ignore that one. And wara just means to divide. So if you're dividing a cake among people, you would also use wara for that, or splitting in half or breaking stuff in half. So let's take a basic expression, for example. Let's say 1 plus 2 times 3. You wouldn't read that with typical Japanese word order. You would just read it as it's kind of in the order that it's written. So it would be read as 1 tas 2 kakeru 3, which does sound very weird compared to typical Japanese sentences, but that's just how it's written down. So it still makes sense. Now, if you want to say that's equal to something, there are 2 ways of doing that. There's a more simple, relaxed way of saying it, which is just wa, like the particle wa, which is the equivalent of saying 1 plus 2 times 3 is 7. Or you can also say ikoru, which is from the English word equals, and that's what you'll hear in school in more formal mathematical situations. So 1 plus 2 times 3 equals 7 can be read as either 1 tas 2 kakeru 3 ikoru 7, or 1tas 2 kakeru 3 wa 7. One little side note I want to make about how these simple arithmetic expressions get read out is with the Japanese times table, which is just called the kuku, or the 99, because it goes from 1 times 1 up to 9 times 9. The kuku uses different readings for the numbers than what you would normally read them as in typical mathematical equations. For example, 3 times 8 equals 24. That is not read as 3 kakeru 8 wa 24. It's read as 3pa 24, which is very different. But those numbers only get read in that way in the kuku, from what I can tell. Now let's talk about fractions, going a little bit deeper into division, because you don't really see the division symbol in higher level maths. So just for a general fraction A over B, you would actually read that in kind of reverse from English. You would read that as bibun no A. So that literally means A of B parts. But since no is kind of backwards from of, the B gets placed before the A. Which is kind of counterintuitive to English speakers and speakers of languages where you don't do that. In the script, I was going to use an example of 5/7, which is 7分の5, but I accidentally wrote 5分の7, which is 7/5, which is a completely different number. So, yeah, it's confusing and slightly counterintuitive. Another short little remark I want to make is about parentheses. So the Japanese word for parentheses is kakko. And from what I could tell, there isn't really a word for open parentheses or, start parentheses, left parentheses, whatever you want to say. But for the right side, the right parentheses, this is going to look backwards to you. Left, right. Left, right. So for the right parentheses, the standard word that I found for it is kaっこ閉じる. But I found tons of people saying that they've heard other ways of saying that. So I found かっこ閉じ, 閉じかっこ, 終わりかっこ, 開始かっこ, even just 右かっこ. And other Japanese forum users and stuff seem to also be slightly befuddled by this. Most of them just say かっこ閉じる, but there are variants out there. How common are they? Seemingly not very. If native Japanese speakers also get confused by these things. But I'm just pointing it out, okay? And just like in English, you don't need to read the parentheses out loud. You can just kind of skip over them if you're reading equations out loud. Hey, so update, I am in the middle of editing this, and I said that there isn't really a lot of words for open parentheses. I was looking over the screenshots for the video, and yeah, no, there are words. It seems to be most common that people just say kakko, but again, like with kakko tojiru, there are other words that some people apparently say, like this man over here. So next up, I want to talk about exponentiation, which in Japanese is るいじょう. So stuff like, 2 squared, 3 to the 4th, stuff like that. So a to the b would be read as え no b 乗, where you just put numbers for a and b. So 3 to the 4th, for example, which I said earlier, is 3の4乗. The exception to this is with to the power of 2, which in English also has an exception. We call that squaring. So you can either say 2 to the 2, which is kind of weird, 2 to the second power, or 2 squared. So you can say 2 squared as either 2の2乗 or 2の次乗, where the g is the character for self. Now when it comes to the opposite of exponentiation, aka taking roots, the Japanese language doesn't really have a specific native word for roots, as I can tell. It's just ruto, like just the concept of roots. You just say ruto. However, there are separate words for square roots and cube roots. Those are hei hou kon andりっぽうこん, where kon also means root, like the root of a plant. And in general, the nth root of something is jo kon. So, for example, the 4th root of 3, just to come up with a number on the spot, is 3の4乗kon. That's the 4th root of 3. Now, in the opposite way, logarithms actually have a native Japanese word. It's たいすう. Although when you actually read the symbol, you usually just say log. Or for a log base n, you say log n te. So the te comes from the word soko, which just means base. It's also used in base as in like the base of an exponent. Which, by the way, the exponent is called a shisu. So in a to the b, a would be the soko and b would be the shisu. So in the same way, the 2 in log base 2, that would be a soko. But when you read it in log base 2, you read it as te. So rogu ni te. And if you want to apply that to a number, say log base 2 of 4, you read that as rogu ni te no yon. There are 2 bases where the logs have their own names. First of all, there's the natural logarithm, just like in English. People sometimes read that as eren, but if you want to give it its own proper name, then it's justしぜんたいすう, just like in English. Literal translation, しぜん means nature or natural, and たいすう means logarithm. And the base 10 logarithm is called the 常用対数, or the common use logarithm. Next up, I want to talk about trigonometric functions, which aren't the most interesting, kind of, because when you read them, you usually just read them with the English names, or just read them how they're written. So, sine is sine, cosine is cosine, tangent is tangento, etc. It's not that interesting, although I will point out these do actually have native Japanese words. They're just not very common from what I can at the very least tell. So, sine is seigan, secant is seikatsu, tangent is seisetsu, and they have their equivalents. So cosine is yogan, cosecant is yokatsu, and cotangent is yosetsu. And we want to read that kind of applied to a number. So, for example, sine of 45 degrees, you just read that as sine 45 度. And for general functions, which by the way I call 関数, a tick variable, it's called a 変数, you kind of just read the name of the function and then the variable. So for example, f of x, that's just read as fx. fx. Not f, no x, just fx. And by the way, I will point this out because I have wondered this in the past, even though it's kind of a dumb question. No, they do not use kana as variable names in Japan. They use Roman and Greek letters just like the rest of us. And finally, the last thing I want to cover in terms of functions are integrals and derivatives, which some of you might not even know what those are. That's completely fine. So the Japanese word for derivative is a bibun. So if you want to say the derivative of something, you just say something no bibun. And for common ways to notate derivatives like d dx or f prime, you just say d dx and prime, like the English words. Again, it's not super interesting. And for integrals, the word is sekibu, but when you're reading it in an equation, you usually just say integrare, and the integral from a to b is read as integrare a kara b no, and then the rest, and then dx. Why did I jump? And finally, the last thing I want to cover are some of the famous mathematical constants, or the teisu, as they're called in Japanese. They tend to have their own names for at least the ones that you and I are probably thinking about. So first of all, pi. The Japanese word for pi is anshuritsu, which clearly just character for character means circle circumference ratio, which makes sense because it's the ratio between the circumference of a circle to its diameter. I almost said radius, it's diameter. Now one that's slightly more interesting, at least to us English speakers, is the number e. We usually tend to think of it as Euler's number, but in Japan they actually named it after a different mathematician. In Japan, the number is called Napier. It's named after John Napier, who is apparently a Scottish mathematician who lived in like the 1600s, 1500s, and did some of the first studies on logarithms. Although apparently Napier didn't actually know the value for e like at all. He just knew that it existed, which is kind of funny. I have no clue why the Japanese called it after Napier and not someone like Euler. Like, you'd expect it to be called something like Oirasu or something, but no, it's Napiasu. If I had to guess, it may have had something to do with, I don't know, the Dutch. Maybe that's what the Dutch called that number, and, you know, the Dutch and Japanese were trading partners around this time, so maybe they got some mathematical documents from the Dutch where they referred to it as Napier's number. That's just a hunch, though. I personally have absolutely zero clue. And finally, the kind of other famous mathematical constant that I can at least think of is the golden ratio, which doesn't really have a very interesting Japanese name either. It's just a literal translation of golden ratio. It's the ogonhi. Like, there's not much to it. So yeah, that was all that I wanted to talk about in this video. I have other ideas for other sort of educational videos that I want to make later on. So if you like this one, please tell me that you like it because I like the affirmation. And I will see you later, so bye bye!